So yes, I am the last-minute replacement for Garrett, our head of sales at Kochava. Hence me coming in as an injured reserve with the raspy voice, just getting over a cold, so apologies. For those of you who don't know Kochava, we are the world's leading mobile measurement and attribution provider, which means we have a piece of technology that lives inside games and apps that allows them to understand where their users are coming from, what they're doing, and identify the good users and the bad users, and how to maximize their marketing and customer acquisition strategies to get more of the good and less of the bad. I myself have been in mobile for a very long time, way too long, despite my youthful appearance. I'm much older than I may seem. First thing I did in mobile, I ran user acquisition for an app that was #1 on the Fandango App Store. It only worked on green screen Blackberries and Palm Pilots. We had about 10,000 users and we were #1. So the world's gotten way more complex since then, and so too has the world of attribution. Back in the early days of attribution, when I worked at a network, we'd work with big game developers who, quite literally at the end of each campaign, would send us an email with a list of all of the IMEIs, not even device IDs, IMEIs, of everyone who had downloaded their app in that time period. And we'd email them back and say, yep, we're going to take credit for this one, and this one. So too, whatever other network they bought on, there was no deduplication. It was very basic, very rudimentary. Fast forward 10 years later, clearly the market's evolved considerably, and so too has attribution and measurement, and the things that you should really be thinking about as a developer or a marketer who is seeking to use an attribution or measurement solution to improve your customer acquisition efforts. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview on us, and then I'm going to talk about the things we do or we think about in terms of the future of the space. So Kochava, as I mentioned, industry leader. We got a whole bunch of pretty logos of big brands we work with. On the gaming side, that includes MZ, Machine Zone, EA, GSN, host of the largest game developers globally. Our SDK touches just about every device in the world because of the size and scope of our clients. We work with about 3,000 networks to track and manage attribution. So everyone from Facebook and Google and Apple Search down to the smallest random ad network that focuses on sub-Saharan Africa. We support all of them because at some point in time, our clients will have wanted to buy media across them. With that said, there's a few things that we find about the industry that are unique and things to think about when you're planning who you should work with as an attribution vendor. The first is you're spending money on fraud traffic. If you've spent $100 in the space, you've spent at least $1 on some bad traffic. As I just mentioned, we have 3,000 networks that we're integrated with. Just sort of wrap your head around that. There's no way there's 3,000 legitimate networks working with major publishers to get really good distribution, right? There's going to be a whole bunch in there that are rebrokering or doing something shady or doing something odd or interesting. And a lot of times when we find fraud, it's not even necessarily the network's fault. It may be a bad actor on that network. So how big is fraud? This is all analysis that we've done, but we've figured out that the top 10 networks by volume make up 84% of fraud clicks. So it's not just that long. You may think to yourself, well, I only buy from these big guys, I'm good. Not exactly the case. 27% of the top 10 networks installs are fraud. It's a big number. It's over 25 cents on every dollar you spend. Some networks we found have over 50% fraud. And there's a lot of times where we're seeing really interesting, unique things around how people are perpetrating fraud in our space. Because at the end of the day, what you're ultimately selling when you sell digital advertising is thin air, right? It's an impression, it's a view, and it's something that has a very, very short shelf life, a matter of milliseconds. So I think the market is incentivized to perpetrate some of it. And it's our job to help our clients, and really the job of any attribution or measurement vendor, to help their customers identify, protect, and remove the fraud. So there's different levels, right? This is probably not a thing that most people want to admit, but there are times that fraud isn't a bad thing. You're buying installs for really cheap. It's helping juice your app store rank. If a network is blending in a little bit of fraud there, which is allowing you to buy more cost effectively, maybe you're okay with it. But our belief is that we should give you the power to identify and choose that. So we have a series of fraud prevention tools that first identify what's wrong, then give you the tools to say, yay or nay, I want to provide attribution and give credit for that install, and then to customize the filters set on those so they can be different for different networks and different campaigns and different apps you may have. So this is kind of a good visualization of what it looks like, right? Where you have all the different ways in which you're driving clicks. So it could be publishers, influencers, affiliates, is where our traffic verifier and blacklist sit, and then determining what you should pay for. And I think what we do on the traffic verification and blacklisting side is where it gets really unique. So we have a whole bunch of different algorithms that we run. I think there's 13 different ones currently that identify variances in different ways in which we view the data that's driving your installs. So one of those maybe we call MTTI, which is median time to install. So we look at all of your installs that come from attributed sources, and we say, what is the average amount of time or the median time seen between the click and the first open? And usually there'll be a pretty wide range, and it'll be a nice bell curve, right? Somewhere around a few minutes is where you'll see the top of the bell curve. And we identify outliers. So if there are certain networks that live really far on either side, that is a good indicator of fraud. We also maintain a global blacklist. So as we identify networks or publishers, influencers that are driving fraudulent activity across all of our clients, who collectively make up $6 billion or so in mobile media buying per year, we take that and we centralize that blacklist so that everybody gets to use it for the benefit of their campaigns. And that can be blacklisting by publisher ID, by network ID, by ID of the phone, the IDFA or Android ID, or by IP address range. So there's a whole bunch of different ways we look at identifying the different types of fraud. Could be click stacking, could be install fraud, could be fake impressions, could be attribution front running, where you run a campaign with a network, and they drive a couple clicks, and they say, I know this advertiser is buying media. So I know Benoit over here from Mammoth Media right now is buying installs for his new chat app, which is creepily addictive, and I shouldn't admit that on stage because it's really something my kids should use and not me. So he's driving installs for his chat app right now, and he buys ads from random ad network. And network says, he's running a campaign right now, and we know that Kochava is doing attribution, and it's the last click. Whoever drives the last click gets credit. So even though we're only getting a click every 10 minutes for his campaign, once we see a device ID who clicks once, we're just going to fire fake clicks every 10 seconds until Kochava tells us that we've won that attribution. Because we know that that user's probably likely to install, even if it wasn't us who drove it, even if they did it 3 days later after seeing an ad on Facebook. So there's a lot of interesting things that developers, your networks and partners can do, and it's our job and your attribution provider's job to identify those and say, wait a minute, that network just drove 10,000 clicks from that device ID in the last 48 hours. That's bullshit, right? That can't be real. That person has really sore thumbs, and they've served a lot of ads, or there's no way it's legit. And it's our job to not only inform you of it, but give you the tools to be able to go back to that network and say, I'm not paying for that one, and furthermore, I'm not paying for these other 100 that look suspicious. So I think fraud has become a very big part of our industry. Truthfully, for the last half decade, I think most attribution and measurement providers have sat on the sidelines a bit and said, hey, we're an independent middleman. We hear no evil, we see no evil. We give you all the data, Mr. Advertiser. You decide what's fraud. But that's kind of BS, right? If we're the ones who are out here staking a claim to being so good at doing attribution in your source of truth, then we need to be able to put a foot forward and say, we're not only going to give you the data, we're going to help you understand it and give you the tools to do something about it. So fraud's the first one. Second on the list is attribution is not one size fits all. So everyone's campaigns are very different. Benoit here, I don't know why he's at a gaming event, runs a messaging and chat app. I'm assuming he also has some games. But they're very different, right? A customer like MZ, who has a tried and true strategy RPG style game with very high LTVs, is going to have a very different approach to the way in which they do customer acquisition than, say, a Jam City or a MobilityWare, who has a similarly tried and true game, but a very different model where they have a much higher DAU and a much lower LTV. So the types of partners they buy on and the ways in which they work are very different. A big part of that is variance in partners and types of campaigns. So the next big thing that we're really focused on, and think that all attribution providers should be, is multi-touch. So the notion there is that, and we don't believe, in our system, we don't consider anything organic. We have attributed and unattributed. We don't believe that there's such thing as someone who just organically decides to download your app. They heard about it from a friend, they saw an ad on Facebook, they saw a post, they saw a TV ad, they saw a paid ad in a network. There's a host of different ways in which you could get into their mind, but it's highly unlikely that one day they woke up and said, you know, I think I want an app like this. Let me go see if I can find one. So we build out models that allow you to not only identify the single source of last click attribution, which is what virtually every network in the space works on. But we also give you the power to be able to analyze all the different touch points, all the different influences, where are all the ways in which this consumer, this device, heard or saw about my app before ever coming to it. So you can identify not just who drove that last click, but what the weighting is, right? What the value is of those other touch points. A really unique part about multi-touch is that currently, almost no networks support what we call fractional attribution, which is the ability to actually give them only a part of attribution. I think that's going to change. We believe that's going to change in the coming months and years. And so it's important right now. Most attribution providers will tell you, no point in doing multi-touch because it's not going to matter. You can't report back part of a CPI, part of an install. That may be true, but that doesn't necessarily help you when it comes to planning and informing your media buying and your marketing mix. So although you may find very few networks who accept a fractional attribution, we at least give you the tools to be able to do multi-touch analysis, to really understand the variances in where your customers are coming from. There may be a network that claimed very little attribution, but drove a ton of influence, right? They were the first impression that everyone saw. It took 5 impressions and 3 clicks until you drove an install, but it's really important to have that first impression. It may change your buying model. Maybe with that partner, you start buying on a CPM basis, and you frequency cap the number of times a user can see your impressions, because you know that the value of what they're driving is different than if they were claiming attribution credit on an install. So we give you all of those tools, and I think it's, again, a very important thing to note when looking at an attribution provider. The last piece is configurability. So looking at not only each of those things per network, but adjusting the configurability of them. So for a network that is driving tons of last click and really high click volume, you may want to dial down their configuration in terms of the number of days their window is available, versus a network who's driving a lot of view through, where the attribution's taking place maybe later on, or maybe vice versa, depending on your marketing tactics. So for us, it's really important that you have the ability to adjust your look-back window, because it's not one size fits all, right? Every advertiser and every network have different relationships, and you'll have different relationships across your varying network or publishing partners. So we make it a strong point in our platform to enable heavy amounts of configurability, so you can customize the way in which you dial up or down your attribution to match well with your marketing mix. The last piece is maximizing ROI. You need the complete picture. So in the same vein of this notion of looking at multi-touch attribution from paid media, you also need to be looking at non-paid media. So being able to track your own properties. So when Benoit cross-promotes one of his apps with another, he needs to be able to use a trackable link. So even though he's not attributing or paying himself for the install, he needs to be able to know what's working and what isn't, right? What push notification or what in-app messaging creative, or maybe it's an email blast or a social share, or maybe it's earned media. Maybe it's a partner who's writing a story about you that you get to use a tracking link so that you know, oh, this press is actually driving more downloads than our paid media, or they're influencing or helping drive downloads of it. I think that's a really important piece. The second is what we call audience insights, so understanding your audience much better. Within Kochava, we have a platform called The Collective. It happens to be the part of the business that I run, so this is my favorite part of the discussion, which is a very large amount of data that we collect from partners from our free app analytics product and outside data supply partners that allows us to have a really big view of almost 2 billion devices globally around things they're doing on their device. So what are their apps they have on their phone? What places do they go? What are their demographics? We collide all this data together into a very unique marketplace and then allow customers to use us for attribution to build cohorts of their audience and learn more about them. So it's not, in my mind, it's great for an attribution provider to tell you, hey, these 10,000 people who made 3 purchases in the last week came from this source, but what else is there to know about them, right? Just that they came from Facebook or just they came from Apple is useful. We find it extra useful to know, does it turn out that 80% of them have Spotify? Does it turn out that they're actually, you think your target audience is a male 18 to 34 SKU, but it turns out that it's actually running much heavier. It's more like males 18, 40 plus, or maybe it has a much bigger mix of female and male than you thought. And how do you use that to inform your creative and your funnel and your messaging and your flow? Or maybe it's identifying users who have not made a purchase in your game, but out of those million people who haven't made that purchase, we've seen 200,000 of them make a purchase in a different game. And all of a sudden, you can change your IAP strategies to ensure that you're really driving those 200,000 users out of that cohort into a funnel that's more likely to convert at an initial purchase. So it's utilizing all those forms of data to try to really understand your users better beyond just simply what you see in terms of where they come from and the actions they take in your app, but what are all the things that they do on an ongoing basis. And the last piece is really unifying your strategy. This clicker doesn't like me. So taking all of the things we talked about, putting them all into one single unified solution that allows you to track, where do my users come from? Is it my own efforts? Is it paid efforts? Is it earned efforts? And is it not just where do they come from directly, but what's influencing them? What's causing them to come from those places? Where are we getting bad users, and how do we cut those out? So how do we eliminate and minimize the fraud? And then who are our best users? How do we understand and analyze who the real quality is, optimize away from the bad and towards the good, and then learn more about all of your users to help you identify marketing tactics both within your media spend as well as cross-promotion, funnel analysis, funnel engagement to make sure that you're driving as many of them through your conversion, whether that's IAP, heavy amounts of retention, ad support monetization, however you're going to ultimately make money off the users you're paying to acquire, making sure that you're driving the right user through the right funnel. I think those are all really the most kind of important critical things to think about when you look at an attribution vendor. Clearly we're biased. We're quite convinced that we're the best at all of those. But I think there's a reason that a lot of large brands and clients use us. It's because we've really focused on trying to be forward thinking about where the market's going and how we can support the growth of the industry so that we're not still living in a world of emailed lists of ideas and are really getting much more complex and thinking about the scale capabilities that we can deliver and attribution providers can deliver for their clients. So the last thing I'll say in wrap up is we have our Kochava Enterprise SDK, which is our premium measurement SDK. It starts for very little, a couple $100 a month. You get all the bells and whistles and full controls. We also have a free version, so if you're an indie developer or someone who's just dipping their toe into attribution, highly recommend you download our SDK. It's quite literally the same one for free and for enterprise, just free. There's a few bells and whistles missing in the platform. You don't get some of the fraud tools and some of the really deep configurability. Works just as well as any other basic attribution provider, unlimited scale across all of our networks. And it's a great way to get started. Start using it, see the value, and then when you get bigger or you choose to, you can always upgrade to the other. No technical changes required. It's a flip that we switch on the platform side. So that's the wrap up of mine. Any questions you guys have, open to it, or you can come find me after. We also have a booth with some big signage in the room next door.
First question. You touched on your guys' more proactive role in not only identifying fraud, but kind of fighting fraud.
Yep.
And I wondered if you could are you in the conversation with your advertisers and networks?
100%, yeah. I mean, so the tools that we provide not only allow you to identify fraud, but actually do fraud abatement. So you can actually set configurability settings that just straight up use our platform to not attribute. Now, typically, if it's more than a very small percentage of fraud coming through, the client is going to want to talk to the network. You could just say, 2% is fraud, we're going to flip this and stop attributing them, and no one really knows any better, it's fine. Typically, if it's a big percentage, we actually help, I wouldn't say mediate, but sort of lay out the facts, right? Here's what we see, this is where we see irregularities, and a lot of times, to be honest, we started doing it, this is probably not a data point I should share on stage, but whatever. We started doing it towards the end of last year, and we actually saw a significant drop in a time of the year where you'd expect to see an increase in our company revenue of paid attribution, because all of a sudden, a lot of advertisers were like, whoa, those are fraud, turn those guys off. And they hadn't repurposed and moved their own budget. What that led us to realize was that there's a huge amount of networks who all of a sudden came back to us and said, whoa, we need a solution for ourselves. So if there's any network folks out there, we do offer our fraud solutions for networks as well. Because they said, this isn't us. We're not trying to do this. We got a couple of bad actors in our platform, publishers who are, sort of scheming the system. Give us those tools so we can catch it before it even has to get to our advertisers, and we can eradicate it.
Very cool. Second question. Sounds like you're doing a lot to power your clients' understanding of where installs are coming from, and how to better design IAP around getting as much money as possible. Are you doing anything to add to include their ad revenue into that mix?
Oh yeah, 100%. So We do both. So we do cost and ad. So you have the ability within our platform to be able to integrate. We have cost integrations with almost all of the largest networks and partners. And then you have the ability to create configurable events in our platform where you can actually configure your ad revenue and ad views as an event in the system that you can assign CPMs to. So you can have kind of a name value pair against it to re-ingest that data so that when you're looking at downstream events, the same way you treat an in-app purchase of 99 cents or $1.99, you can treat a rewarded video view or a banner impression or whatever. And obviously, CPMs are variant heavily across games and genres, but you can build that all in.
Okay, last question, unless anybody else has one, but last question was, did you plant your friend Benoit in the audience? So that you could refer to him constantly?
I haven't actually seen Benoit and I used to work together. I haven't actually seen him in like a year. He just happened to walk in and sit down. So yes, that is the first conversation we've had in a long time.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Grant. That was a really great talk. Another big round of applause, please.
Thanks, guys.